All right. Tim, I want to start right out. I asked Kirby to compare Jalen Milroe to you, which may or may not have been a good idea. I don't know if you saw that clip, but
I saw a tiny bit of it.
what are your thoughts on what Kirby said and what you've seen from Milroe, and do you like him at all to your game when you played with the Gators?
Oh, he's a whole lot faster and more explosive than I am, that's for sure. I do think we have very different running styles, probably overall very different playing styles, but I love his game. Honestly, I really have loved it for a long time, even before this season. You could see spurts of pieces of his game that other people just don't have and can't have. He's so different and gifted. And I remember parts of that really showed up last year against Arkansas when he got some of his opportunities, and then watching him over the last couple of years just in pregame. And you would see, okay, you don't know if he's going to put everything together, but you just know, okay, there's bits and pieces that could be really special. And you also, when a lot of guys walk by, like I've seen for a long time, in playing, and then the last 10 years of doing this, a lot of guys walk by. When he walks by, you're like, dang, that dude's kind of put together, And this was as a freshman, so he's very gifted, and I think the way that he's continued to take all those traits and abilities and improve them and improve his strengths, but also improve his weaknesses, his decision making. I'm going to show a tape tomorrow about him throwing with conviction in the red zone, more so now than he's ever done. His decision making, his ability to be decisive in the running game on third down and take off, but then also now what Tommy has implemented is some of the quarterback run, which I think will be more involved in this game than probably any other game, maybe other than LSU, where it's not just zone read or scramble, but there's actually some design quarterback runs, which gave LSU fits in that game, which sometimes would look like zone read, but it's not. It's more of a quarterback keeper all the way. I think that'll be more implemented. You look at those four areas and you just think, man, this guy can really take over a game, win all of those things when he's using them well, and the team's really putting that together, which they haven't always had to, right? And so he's very gifted and a special player.
Georgia has a lot of offensive weapons too, a lot of mismatches for the Alabama defense. What does Alabama defense specifically need to zero in on when you have a guy like Brock Bowers and some other guys like that?
I think the number one key for Alabama's defense is find a way, whatever it is, to make Carson Beck uncomfortable. I don't really believe that he's been uncomfortable all year. Even when he's been behind against South Carolina, when he was behind against Auburn, the tying drive and the go-ahead drive, they got pressure and it didn't even bother him. He stepped up in the pocket, made big-time plays against Blitz Zero this year. He hasn't been uncomfortable. I don't think he got uncomfortable one time against Ole Miss. Like, you got to somewhat fluster a quarterback, and then doesn't mean you're going to get him to get sacks or turnovers. It just means you got to either get pressure, you got to be able to cover down on receivers. He's played at such a high level because he's been comfortable. He's known what the defense is doing. He knows where he's going. He knows he has the arm to be able to make it happen. I mean, he's just played so well at such a high level, and I think somehow you got to get him uncomfortable.
What does that say about a guy that's in his first year as a starter, playing in some of these big stages, that has been so comfortable, and what have you made of his game?
Well, I think it says a couple of things. One is that he's an incredible young man, and I think two, it says that what they do in practice is really good at Georgia. That when I've had the chance to sit down and talk with him, you understand that all the practices against those defenses the last couple of years is probably as hard, if not harder, than what he's experienced this year, and that's real. And when I just think that has prepared him, that when he's his first games, and asking him, all right, your first SEC game and you're down South Carolina. Yeah, but I know who I practiced against over and over again. That creates a confidence when you know that a lot of really good players in the NFL are the guys that you've gone against the last few years. I think it's built his confidence, and he's shown it. And it's been just really fun to watch his maturity and him playing at such a high level. And obviously, he doesn't have the stats that some other guys have because their style of offense isn't, they're not putting touchdowns up late in the fourth quarter. They're not, just a different style. They control the time of possession a lot more than other teams. But the last few weeks, as far as just being efficient and executing his offense, I think you have to put him as a top 5 guy, is just being as efficient and running their offense. Now, it's not always going to equate to stats, but he's playing at an extremely high level.
Hey, Tim, are these 2 of the top 4 teams in college football?
I think they're 2 of the better teams in college football. Yeah, I think I think Georgia's from top to bottom this year. I think they've been playing as one of the best throughout the entire season, and they've gotten better, which is scary for the level they started. And I think at times this year that Alabama has showed that they're at that level too. It's going to be really interesting to see what the committee has to say, because there's a lot of craziness that's either way. It's going to be crazy to see. I actually can't wait.
And I asked that because the last time that we got to talk to you was during the Texas game. So if you looked at how Alabama has transformed from week 2 up to this
They're
point,
different. It's not the same team. And it's, we've tried to be very honest in our meetings, talking with our own team in debates in the room and then on TV. And I've said I personally struggle with it. And I argue with myself on, do you look at the improvement of Alabama throughout the season, and do you put more weight in that, or do you put more weight in the head-to-head? And the game's got to matter, but then you also got to be willing to look at the adaptation of these teams. There is very little that is recognizable about week 2 Alabama versus right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the committee looks at that. And I think anybody that really knows football looks and see a different team, but you also, as someone that also loves the game, the head-to-head has to matter as well. I think it's one of the hardest arguments to make right now in viewing all of it, because it's a different team, but then you're minimizing what happened this season as well, and it's hard.
Is it a tougher argument than maybe putting a 1-loss Bama in over an undefeated Florida State that's a different team without their star quarterback?
I think we really have to define it. I think we have to do in my opinion, we have to do a better job of defining what we want. And if we want the 4 best, and it's not the resume, and it's not conference champs, and it's not that, I think that's one argument. If you want to put it and say that it's that we're going to look at resume, are you really saying it's the 4 best, or are you just saying it's the 4 that are the most easily justified? And I think that's something that we're going to maybe see, depending how the games go this weekend, we're going to see a little bit of it. And I'm very intrigued to see how the selection committee views all of the teams. I think Florida State, depending on what else happens, but they're going to have to win, and depending on what happens, maybe convincingly, because Louisville's lost to Kentucky, that hurts. And if they win close, and there's so many different scenarios that could happen, right? But I mean, let's just say one is, if Alabama got a win, now what's going to happen? It's going to be a lot to take into account. And I think with Jordan Travis playing, it's a different argument than without him. I do think it's a little bit of a different team. I think Jordan Travis is one of the best players, but I would say as important, if not more important, he's one of the best leaders in college football. And you're a different team. Do you punish a team for that? It's also hard for me to understand, but if you say, hey, on head-to-head, who's a better team now? I do think it changes the argument.
You talk about the growth of Alabama. How have you seen Georgia grow from when we talked to you back before that Kentucky game to now, especially considering the time that they spent without Brock Bowers and banged up playmakers elsewhere?
How has Georgia improved in that?
Yes.
I think they're improved, but I don't know if it's just improved or it's that we got to see that they're able to do different things as well. So I think it's both. I think that, there's so many other guys that they're so gifted. And sometimes I think we minimize that. Like, it's not Nick Chubb in the backfield. It's not Sony Michel. It's, Lad's out. They got a lot of dudes that can go play. Oscar Delp is a backup tight end. That's also one of the better tight ends, I think, in the SEC. they got a embarrassment of riches, and I think when you got a quarterback like Carson, that it's not I'm just going to one guy. I mean, he's going to wherever the coverage reads, whatever the game plan is. And I love it that when Brock came back, the majority of the time they use him as a decoy, and he works that way, and he helps the team that way. So I think it's also important to give Mike a lot of credit for his designs and what he's done and his game plans, because they have been excellent, especially Ole Miss.
I was going to ask about Kendall Milton emerging.
Yeah.
Kendall Milton,
Yeah.
you were talking about different players. Kendall Milton, Dylan Bell.
He's gotten so much better. I think so. I think he's improved, and I don't think people realize what a big boy he is when he gets going downhill. And the offensive line has really come together, and their double teams are silly right now, moving people off of the ball. That's another breakdown we're going to do tomorrow, is the Alabama does a really good job with their interior defensive line of fighting through double teams, not getting pushed, and Georgia does such a good job with their offensive line of staying on double teams and making the backers work over the top, and that gives running lanes. And so that's a fascinating matchup that I'm excited. Maybe it's not as glorious to talk about as other matchups, but I'm really excited. And for a back like Kendall, when he gets going downhill, when you get a linebacker peep one side or the other and he's downhill, it doesn't matter. You get arms on him, he ain't going down. And I just think he's continued to improve, more confidence, that rhythm that backs get into. I've seen that a lot more, especially I think it was maybe starting Tennessee game. Yeah. He's hard to bring down, especially when he's less of this and more of this.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just messing around. Let's have fun. Let's go.
You're, I would say, a monologue king. Whenever you do your intros for College Game Day, you really set the scene and have a story. This Alabama team is a different story compared to what Nick Saban has been used to. Why is it so magical, and I would say good for the conference and good for college football and stuff, to see the way Alabama's been able to respond and write a different story this year?
Well, I think it's probably disappointing for people outside or who like to root against Alabama, because they were pretty sure they were done after Texas and USF. But I think it's interesting because they are unlikely underdogs. I think it's only the fourth time since 2010 that they've not been favored in a game, all of them against Georgia, but 2-1 in those games. And I think because of the dynastic nature of what they've accomplished over the last 16, 17 years, it's a little bit of a different kind of team. They grew. I've used the analogy that typically when Alabama comes out of fall practice and starts the season, no team stays stagnant or else they get worse, but the room that they have for growth is typically not a lot. There are rough edges to, file away. There may be some individual positions that have to grow a little bit, but basically they're pretty stout. This year, there was a lot of room to grow, and the good news for them is that they grew a lot, and now they have an opportunity, at least an opportunity to play for a conference championship.
Reece, are these among the two top of the four teams in college football, Georgia and Alabama?
They haven't separated themselves, and Alabama certainly hasn't. And that's why I understand what Nick and others have said, that it would be, their word, not mine, disrespectful not having an SEC team in. I don't know that I agree with that, because I don't think the SEC, while maybe still the best conference, there's not this gap, in my judgment, from watching teams play this year between the SEC and the other conferences, and that's been borne out in non-conference play. The argument has always been that there is a more difficult upper middle class in the SEC, as it were, and that even the lower middle class, right day, right road game can be difficult. That's still true, but I don't think there's the same type of separation. And because of that, it won't be unreasonable if Alabama pulls the upset to put them in over, perhaps, for instance, a diminished Florida State team. Neither will it be unreasonable to leave them out. So it's, I don't know. Georgia might have separated and might be unequivocally one of the best four teams in the country. Does that perception change if they lose to Alabama? I don't think that anyone has separated where they say, well, you know what, even if they lose, they're getting in. I do think probably that Georgia can still beat anybody, even if they lose. I'm not sure if Alabama's there yet, but Alabama can win the game, so we'll see how it goes.
the development of Jalen Milroe too. Do you think he's one of the guys from week 2 from that Texas loss to now? What has he really grown in your opinion?
Patience, willingness to run the football, which I think was huge, which really was on display against LSU. I was at practice on Thursday and saw more quarterback run that week, and I was like, that's interesting. And then it's become quite a weapon for them. And he's such a phenomenal athlete. He's growing as a quarterback. He'll tell you that. He said it many times that he's not a finished product, but boy, he's taken steps that are leaps and bounds over the course of the year, never gets flustered. And I think the savvy that he's shown, knowing when to get out of the pocket, knowing when to go ahead and pick up the first down. Every play doesn't have to be a huge play. It's really good if it's 3rd and 6, it's really good to pick up 7 and step out of bounds and get a fresh set of downs, and Jalen's been great at that. And because of the pressure that he puts on a defense, because of that, it's allowed him to use that gift that he has. He's got remarkable touch on the deep ball. He's fearless, and I think he probably has grown as much, if not more, than any quarterback I've seen in the country over the course of the year.
When you think back to the beginning of the season versus now, what surprised you the most about this Georgia Bulldogs team?
Once again, I think growth and winning a different way. I mean, this defense is still really, really good. But the last 2 years, all those guys are playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, they're not as good as they were the last couple of years. They're still really good. That's not some kind of slight or insult. So instead, they just now cut you to pieces on offense with this explosive offense. And even when Brock Bowers has been hurt and Ladd McConkey's been out, they just find another weapon. I've been absolutely mesmerized watching Dylan Bell. Hand it to him, they let him throw it, they throw it to him. He's like a secret weapon that it's like when you have an emergency, break glass and use Dylan Bell. He's so they've got so many weapons on offense, and Carson Beck is the epitome of what happens when you stay the course. Not unlike Milroe, but in a different way, because Carson had a chance a couple of years ago, and a lot of people in Georgia like to downplay this, but Carson had a chance to take over when JT Daniels got hurt. It didn't go as well as perhaps he would have hoped in practice that week, so they went to Stetson, and everybody knows what happened after that. A lot of guys would get discouraged after that or say, this is not for me, they're not handing me the reins. He just kept getting better. And now, man, he's a dude. He's an NFL quarterback. Now, I'll get ahead of this. Whatever they want to pay him, they should, and Carson should stay, in my judgment, because we've seen quarterbacks struggle who don't have a lot of starts. So come back, get probably 15 more starts, given Georgia's talent under your belt, and you might be QB1, next year. So I think he's just been terrific for them. He's put up numbers. I know he's probably not in the Heisman race this year, but he's put up numbers that are certainly worthy of being evaluated. And I think he's been growth. A lot of the Georgia fans got really upset with me because I didn't rank them preseason #1, and all I said was I want to see the quarterback play. I didn't think that was unreasonable. I've seen him. He's a dude, and I think he's been terrific for them.
All that being said about Milroe and the Georgia defense, what do you think the key to keeping him under control is?
Don't let him hit the shot plays. Don't let him crush you running. He's going to get some yards running. He'll be one of the fastest guys on the field, and he's 6'2", 6'3", and weighs 230 pounds. You're unlikely to shut him down, but if you can make him hesitate and perhaps make a mistake, which he hasn't made many of over the last month. But if Georgia can do that, and particularly keep him from killing them on 3rd down with conversions with his legs and with big plays, he's hit a ton of 3rd and long passes too. If you can put him in 3rd down situations and win those, that will be the best way to keep him under control. I would highly recommend against letting him get into 4th and 31 situations. He's really good in those situations.
What was your reaction to 4th and 31?
I thought at first that he'd thrown it out of the back of the end zone, and that I was sort of stunned disbelief, I think, in what happened, because you don't see that play pulled off very often, because I don't like it when people say it was a Hail Mary. It was not. It was a dime. It was an absolute laser beam dime, on a 4th and 31 at the end of the game. You just don't see it. And it was a great play by Isaiah Bond. I don't want to diminish that at all. But there was like one window about that big that ball could be put into, and he put it there, and it was an unbelievable throw. So, it was sort of stunned disbelief after everything that had gone wrong, the shakiness that they had, shown, whether it was penalty or even, if the guy clapped, he didn't clap, whatever, the snap, went sailing back toward the other goal line, and then to pull it out was, you're like, did that just happen? It was pretty remarkable.
With the possibility of Alabama losing Chase McClellan tomorrow, does that hurt, I guess, the run game when you say something like that? Who needs to step up with that?
Hey, look, he's a terrific back, and he's hard-nosed, and he's experienced, and he runs tough, but they've got a really deep running back room that hasn't fully been on display. Roydell Williams has been really good for them second half of the season. I think Jam Miller is a guy who is explosive, and it seems like every time he touches it, something big happens. Probably see a little more of him, and there's probably some hope that maybe you'll see a little bit more of Justice Haynes, who, I had a good friend of mine, a guy who was in my wedding, who's like Johnny Bulldog to the core. You cut him and little bulldogs climb out of him. He said, my worst fear is that Justice Haynes steps on our face with a hobnail boot and breaks our nose. So, we'll see what happens.
There was a few people that earlier in the season said that Nick Saban lost his fastball. What have you seen from Coach Saban this year?
Oh, yeah. People love to say that, don't they? I've used this analogy a lot, so I'm not breaking new ground for you, but most coaches that I've encountered, there are very, very few exceptions. Most coaches I encounter, because of the self-imposed pressure, because of the grind, because of the nature of the attention, the scrutiny, and all the way things are changing with players and everything, it just eats away at them, eats away, and they either get a little complacent or they get a little frustrated or whatever it might be. This guy's different, man. He needs it like you and I need oxygen, and he is always looking for a better way. I mean, when he was with us in a national championship game last year, he recommended a book to me that I've read parts of, and excerpts of, and it's about believing in people and getting the most out of people. It's remarkable how that drives him, and how the first time I met him, and he doesn't remember this because I didn't stay in Michigan long enough before coming to ESPN, I met him when he got the Michigan State job, but I left before he ever coached a game there. But the difference in him in that news conference and the perception of him, say, dating back to the Michigan State days, or even LSU, and what you see now shows remarkable growth of a human being who successful people don't often like to adjust because they do what's made them successful. And he, more than anybody in sports, I think, has changed his approach. Maybe Mike Krzyzewski. Maybe, Nick and Mike are probably the two guys who adapted better than any old school coaches that I've ever seen and continue to have success all the way through.
And speaking of coaches, let's talk Mike Bobo for a second. Someone who faced a lot of criticism at the beginning of the season, and now seeing what he's done, do you think that he was the right guy for this Georgia team?
It's obvious. I mean, what they've done has been remarkable, and I've always liked Mike and respected him, but you looked at that and you go, boy, I don't know, because the recent results and the recency bias didn't suggest that this was going to ignite the Georgia offense, yet it did. And he's got a great way with quarterbacks. He knows how to use personnel packages. He knows how to pick spots really well, good play caller, really smart guy, highly respected in the industry. And I think he is worthy of every accolade that he's gotten up to this point. I mean, he, before he had his health issues there for a while, he was doing a really good job as a head coach and was kind of on an upward trajectory in my judgment. And to have a guy like that who's been a head coach, certainly knows Georgia inside out, knows the conference inside out, and is very not only sound but clever and able to be creative, not in a wild bunch of trick plays kind of way, but he's clever and creative in his ability to create matchups. Like, everybody in the free world knows that they want to throw the ball to Brock Bowers when he's healthy, and yet they still throw the ball to Brock Bowers, And there's a certain level of creativity that goes with that, and I think Mike's just done an unbelievable job for Georgia this year. All right.
Thank you.
Order, you guys got it down by now or no? We're just firing away? Okay.
All right, well, This game's a big conversation with the college football playoff. When you look at both of these teams, do you think that despite the outcome that happens tomorrow, do one of these teams or maybe even both belong in the conversation?
I think the outcome of this game dictates what happens. And it's just the idea that I think we've had so many years now in a row where the SEC has been worthy of the spots and the other conferences haven't lived up to what they were supposed to be, that we've got accustomed to that being the norm. And I get it, everybody's down here, national championships, what everybody wants to say, I understand that. But we actually have some qualified other people to do it this year. So I think this outcome is very, very important in dictating who gets into the playoff.
Can you talk about the transformation of Jalen Milroe from week 2 up to this point?
I think it's there's a lot, man. I really think he got humbled in that Texas game. Being there for that game, him throwing the pick, Texas always dictating what they wanted to do after that in that game, and then whatever happened the following week. But I think there was a big humbleness there. I think there was a buy-in also. You got to think about it. You lose the number 1 draft pick in the draft. You lose other pieces. You get a new offensive coordinator in there. That's a learning curve. And these fan bases, especially in this conference, they're spoiled. And I hate to say it, but the only way he was going to get better was to get live game reps. And that's hard to do when you're trying to chase a national championship and you have expectations from a fan base that aren't realistic. And that's what happens a lot across the country now with the way people are expecting your team to win. So it's been so impressive. You could see gradually him get better with his accuracy. I think against LSU, it really clicked when the run. Down and distance, 3rd down. All right, I'm going to take this. I got a seam right here. But it's been awesome to watch, and it's because he's taken the most of his opportunity. And as rough as it was in the beginning, you got to be happy with what you got so far.
Could you also speak on the development of Carson Beck from game 1 to now?
No doubt. It's been awesome because when you look at, everybody talks about the expectations, right? And Georgia spent how long looking for somebody to play quarterback? Stetson comes in, boom, they go. 2 back-to-back, right? And I just thought it was, I thought the fan base was nervous because Carson Beck's not Stetson Bennett. Just look at him, And then to see him, those are some big, I know Stetson's not the biggest guy, but those are some big shoes to step into. And again, with the expectation of your fan base now, that's what he was expected to do. But to see him, again, they get transfer receivers in. You don't have Brock Bowers, but to see him keep getting better and better has been awesome. I noticed him growing up at Auburn in the second half. Like that's where we found out. You're on the road in the SEC in a big time environment, and you bring your team back. That's big boy stuff. So I think ever since then, but again, he needed that opportunity. You can't do that stuff in practice. So that's what really stuck out to me is that Auburn game, and then he's just ascended since then.
As you look at the Georgia defense trying to slow down Jalen Milroe, what do you think is the biggest key there?
I keep bringing it up, just watching the tape. I go back to what Alabama did against Jaden Daniels. It didn't. He hit him over the top a couple times, but that's what you got to do against Bama. But when you watch that pressure, they didn't overrun the pocket. They kept him there, and that's what I expect Georgia to do, especially after last week, watching what Jalen did, getting out of the pocket, seeing the creases in different pressures. I think it's going to be a control. Kirby's done this with prior defenses against mobile quarterbacks, and I think Georgia can play their style of defense and do what they want to do on the defensive side if they know where the quarterback's going to be, right? And I think you do that with a control rush. And I think Georgia could be all right getting pressure with 4. They're phenomenal on the back end. I actually think they have an advantage when you look at the defensive back end personnel with the Bama receivers. So a lot's on Milroe's plate. I think Alabama knows that, but I also think Georgia wants that to be the case. And I think a controlled rush like that and having gap responsibility when you know it's a passing down, that's the thing. And then it starts on 1st and 2nd down, making you always play better defense when you're in a predictable situation, right? So I think it starts that with the controlled rush.
And on the other side too, Bama's up front unit for defense is one of the more premier ones that we've seen them grow. How does that develop a challenge for an offense like Georgia, who's very explosive, but they're rallying points up per game? I think it's like 40 points per game they're averaging.
Yeah.
What kind of matchup is like that?
I think it's an advantage for Alabama because Carson Beck, we talked about Jalen and what he does and the problems he does because he's off script and, doing his thing. When guys aren't open, he can make a decision and go. Carson Beck's not that guy. He's trusting his pocket. And when you look at Alabama coming in, they know they got a stationary quarterback, and they have two phenomenal defensive ends. Now, Georgia's been way better on the offensive line with Mims back. He came back against Ole Miss and being there, seeing him, that's a guy you can't miss. But I like Alabama's matchup because I do like their personnel on the back end and the injuries. We don't know who's going to be at receiver for Georgia. So I look at Alabama having the advantage there, just knowing you have two consistent guys. And you saw them. That's the way they got back in the game last week. Turner and Braswell have been phenomenal, and it helps you. Your secondary guys know they don't have to cover for as long if they know they got guys that can get to the quarterback. So I like that. I like that advantage for Alabama, or I consider it an advantage. I don't want to put words in other people's mouths.
The Alabama back end, the secondary that you talked about there. What is the key to stopping or slowing down Brock Bowers?
Well, I think what Bama does on the back end a lot better than most is they have better personnel, first of all. And when you talk about that, all right, how many guys can I keep on the field, whether I'm playing nickel, whether I'm playing dime, different or first down, base personnel. And those guys, Malachi Moore's a ton of experience, Kool-Aid, ton of experience. Downs has been absolutely phenomenal as a young player. That's a guy that I look to see does he get a little too aggressive. But Bowers is so tough because based on the personnel, you don't know where he's going to be. So you can't just say, all right, you got him the whole game. That's not going to happen. Georgia's praying for you to do that because now they could just run him off and get other guys open, and then you commit two guys to him. So I think it's just not letting anybody behind you to start on the edges and then basically just having multiple eyes on them. It's a lot easier said than done. Plenty of teams over the last 3 years have had opportunities and it hasn't gone well, but it just talks about how special of a player he is. He's been my favorite player to watch in college football the last 3 years, and knowing what he's done, his story coming from California, and just the difference he is. There's just, when you talk about this game, there's a bunch of difference makers. He might be the number one guy that's the biggest difference maker in the whole game.
Stanford Steve, so this is a Pac-12 related question, but it has to do with resumes. Oregon is a team that sits above Texas and Alabama. Yep. What do you like about Oregon's resume, and why do they have a right currently by the committee center, at least in your opinion, to be ranked where they are?
I don't like anything about their resume compared to Alabama or Texas. I really don't.
Thank you.
When you look at it, I was there for the Utah game, and I get it. Utah has played off of past great teams, and they have a name. They've made a mark for themselves. That's credit for them. But when you look at the tape and you watch the personnel, that's not a typical Utah team. And when you compare the Oregon thing to Texas and Alabama, they don't have it. Well, now Oregon State stayed ranked, so they have one top 20 win. And I just don't think. I said it Halloween night when it happened. They should not have been the top-ranked first one-loss team. And the committee has not. I don't think they've been consistent with it because they said Ohio State was ranked when they were one. They were ranked one based off resume. Well, then why didn't you rank the one-loss teams off of resume, knowing that Texas had the best win the whole time since week 2 going to Tuscaloosa? So I'm with you. I haven't agreed since they ranked the one-loss teams Halloween night.
And to follow up on that, with Florida State now without Jordan Travis, are they a top 4 team? And I kind of wonder because they were trailing North Alabama 13-0, and I think if Alabama was trailing Chattanooga 13-0, it seems like they'd be held to a different standard. But your thoughts on Florida State?
You have to grade Florida State with who's playing quarterback right now. And they scored 52 points when he came in the game. So that game's that. Last week, no matter what it is, that's still a damn hard place to go play in the swamp on a Friday night. And what I'll say is I'm still assessing Florida State. If they come out and roll Louisville, which no one is expecting, but if they come out, that's pretty good. That's a pretty darn good resume, and that's as impressive as you could be. You go back and look at 2015 when Ohio State got in. Why did they get in? Because Cardell Jones came in, didn't look like a backup. They scored 59 points in the Big Ten title game, and then you had 2 Big 12 teams just hanging out over here. It's like, whoa, what did Ohio State just do? Maybe it doesn't matter who their quarterback. They have enough great personnel. We'll take Ohio State. So I think Florida State, the judgment based on them still should be open and give them tomorrow night and what they look like.
The Georgia-Alabama storyline, it seems to be never ending, and even though Georgia is back-to-back national champions, it still feels as if they're the little brother in this rivalry. Could a Georgia win tomorrow change that narrative forever?
Not forever. Nothing in my mind will change forever. I don't think they're the little brother anymore. Being there for the Ole Miss game, and then that was the first time in a while, you could see how cranked up things are in Athens. They know what they got. Talking to people around the program, they're very, very confident coming in. And on the other side, Alabama it doesn't happen. 4 times since 2010 that they've been an underdog, and every time Georgia's been the other team as the favorite. So that storyline right there is everything everybody wants. Georgia fans always saying, what about us, or you're the favorite now. And then Alabama saying, oh, you're doubting us right now? We're the underdogs? We love that opportunity. It doesn't happen much. So it's everything on the line we have and what we want. And that's why I do, going back to your first question about what's at stake here, I do believe this is an elimination game. I really do.
With that being said, too, the storyline between Kirby and Coach Saban, too, how is the 2 coaches coaching like that be able to rise up and build programs like that? Why is that so good for college football, not just the SEC?
Well, I think it sets a standard for what everybody's trying to get to. Look at Dan Lanning. You know, he learns from Georgia, and now he's out in Eugene, Pacific Northwest. He knows what he has to get to be relevant here. And then you saw him come here last year. That team wasn't ready. And I think you saw that team grow, and I think he used that as motivation. There was no, coaches say tape don't lie. There was no line from that tape that then they got beat 50-something to nothing. Like, they knew what they were up against, and they knew what they have to get to. And now when you talk to him this year, he feels like they've taken the steps necessary to be there. So I think going back to your question about Kirby and Nick, they've just put their teams and their programs at a place saying this is where you need to be. And going back to your thing about the SEC getting multiple teams in the playoff, they deserved it. That's where their teams were, and nobody else matched and tried and could get there. So that's why they were where they're supposed to be.
Thank you very much.
All good?
It was nice to meet you.
Absolutely.